Welcome to Building Healthy Relationships, the 4 Habits podcast, helping you enjoy better harmony at home, thrive at work, and win at life. Here are your hosts, Dr. Andrea and John Taylor-Cummings, recognized authorities on the subjects of improving work relationships and cultures, as well as couple and home relationships.
Well, hello and welcome. Welcome to our audience. This is Building Healthy Relationships, the 4 Habits podcast. And we're here with a special guest today, another very special guest, Linda Phillips, who is going to be joining us to share her views on neurodivergence, embracing neurodivergence during the holidays. And Linda's going to be sharing some top tips for that, because this is a space that she's been working in for, I want to say 30 years. Isn't that right, Linda, or something like that?
That is absolutely right, John.
So welcome. Yeah. I think we want to do a nice formal introduction, don't we?
Well,
Let our guests know who we have on the show.
Linda is our wonderful friend and colleague. We have great fun, don't we, Linda, delivering workshops on working with neurodivergence. But Linda is a communications therapist, and she specializes in working one-on-one with professionals who are neurodivergent, helping them to, empowering them really, to lead fulfilling personal and professional lives. And Linda also brings a wealth of experience in working with employers to make the necessary adjustments to create that workplace where people who are neurodivergent can thrive, be their best selves, and do their best work. So it's a delight to have Linda on the call. Linda, you will be sharing some gold nuggets for anybody who is either neurodivergent themselves or has a neurodivergent partner or family members, colleagues, just some top tips on the additional stresses or pressures that the holidays might bring and how we can all embrace neurodivergence better. So welcome, Linda.
Well, John, sorry, just one second. Just to say, this really covers all bases, doesn't it? So whether you are neurodivergent yourself or living with or working with, so it really takes our thriving at work, harmony at home, winning at life, all of those aspects. So welcome. Sorry, Linda, you're about to...
Not at all. Thank you, John and Andrea. It's my pleasure to be here today. It is always a joy to speak to you both.
Wonderful to have you. And so we're going to kick off with our usual first question about what's your passion? What's the thing that really drives your focus and the change that you'd like to see in the world?
So I guess it is working with people and seeing them actually meeting their full potential, seeing us together dismantle barriers in society so that people feel included and accepted and validated for whoever they are. And I think that really does drive me, because in the world of neurodivergence, if you have any experience of this, you'll know that we're talking about a hidden difficulty that people can't see. And we've got so many talented, wonderful people who are just not able to thrive because society has got huge expectations around how we should behave, what we should do, and how we should show up every day. So it is my absolute passion to work with people to dismantle barriers for themselves so that they begin to see who they are and operate in those strengths, but also to work with the wider group, whether that's a family or whether it's an employer, to actually dismantle barriers to create more inclusion.
That's so powerful and so inspiring. And, we could apply those words to any kind of marginalized group. How do we dismantle barriers and help them feel more included? Maybe before we go further, Linda, it would be really helpful for the audience to just explain the terminology around neurodivergence versus neurodiversity, so we're all on the same page.
Yes, of course. So neurodiversity is a term that often gets used to mean neurodivergence, but actually neurodiversity means all of us. We are a neurodiverse population, meaning that we all think differently. There is no one way of thinking. And I think because...
I used to think my way was the right way.
So did I, John. All my life, I couldn't understand why people didn't think like me. And I think, but it is a serious point, because we do think as soon as someone thinks differently, we assume that they are wrong. We assume that they must be wrong and we must be right. So neurodiversity is basically the paradigm that says it is perfectly normal for us all to have different thinking styles. And then within this huge population that we have neurotypical, which not everybody loves that term, but it's a term that we can use to create some understanding. Neurotypical being the majority way of thinking, and neurodivergence means diverging from that. So not neurotypical, but having a different, equally valid way of thinking and operating, doing things differently. And that would include autism, ADHD, dyslexia, etc.
That's really helpful to understand. Is there a generally agreed percentage of what neurotypical looks like, and what percentage is neurodivergent?
Well, I think this it varies hugely depending on what you read, because I think our we can only count who is diagnosed and who is not, and we know that lots and lots of people are not diagnosed. So currently, some recent literature that came out pointed to 1 in 5 being neurodivergent, so much higher than you might think. And I think, in any given space, in any office environment, in any classroom, in any home, there's often unrecognized neurodivergence, and nobody would know because there's no outward features to signal that. So I think it is probably higher than most people think, and most of us will have contact with somebody who is neurodivergent, whether that's at home or at work, out in the community. Almost certainly, with numbers that high, that will be the case.
Absolutely. 1 in 7 or 1 in 5, that's a lot of people.
Yeah.
It means somebody in the circle around you will have some aspect of neurodivergence, or it might be you yourself. And that leads us neatly on to the question about, so what role does relationships play in the work that you do, and the impact of neurodivergence on relationships?
I think it is huge. It's absolutely essential, because I think traditionally what used to happen was somebody would be sent off to see a therapist to work on themselves. And ideally that meant you come back and you behave like me, you communicate like me. But that's not the case, I think the whole point of it, yes, there is an element which is, let's understand myself. Let me understand how I've been doing life, how I interact with the world, where does my stress come from, those sorts of things. But at the same time, we can't do that in isolation. You do need to have family members understanding what is going on, family members knowing how to accommodate, workplace colleagues, bosses knowing how to accommodate. So it can never be done in isolation if we accept the neurodiversity paradigm, if we accept the social model of disability, which says that society is responsible for the barriers that get put up. I think relationships is key. We need conversations. We need lots of conversations, because it's never one conversation that actually unravels things. People take time to shift perspective. So I think there's lots and lots of conversations that happen, and gradually over time what we're doing is just building a much better level of understanding of each other's needs, and being willing to meet in the middle, whatever that looks like for, any given situation.
Yeah, and that's so important. I know in the workshops that we do, you talk about the things that would cause stress and anxiety for somebody who is neurodivergent in one way or another, which, those who are neurotypical wouldn't bat an eyelid over. It wouldn't mean anything to them, but it creates huge anxieties. What are the things that, especially over the holiday season, we might need to look out for, or be more intentional about, so that we can be more caring and more supportive, more present for people who have anxieties because of their neurodivergence?
So I think particularly thinking about the autistic population, I think one of the key things is certainty. And certainty exists in a greater form when you are doing normal life. So your 9 to 5 job and family life, and the children go to school and I go to work, and there's a level of predictability that happens during the course of normal life. And then we all look forward to these holidays that are coming up. They've got this idyllic picture in mind of what it's going to be like. Everybody's going to be deliriously happy, and we're all going to have a great time. And actually, if you've ever walked around a theme park, you'll see, families are fighting and children are crying, and it gets stressful, and couples are, falling apart because this expectation that we all had wasn't actually met. And one of the key reasons around that is certainty has disappeared, structure has gone. And particularly for the autistic person, that's going to be a big problem. So holidays aren't necessarily this fabulous time, especially if we haven't pre-planned what is going to happen, especially if we haven't communicated around what does this holiday look like? Because one person's idea of, the perfect day is another person's idea of a nightmare. So, I think this issue of communicating beforehand around expectations and planning, it feels like it's unnecessary, especially if you're neurotypical, it may feel less necessary. But if there is a neurodivergent person in the mix, particularly an autistic person, this planning and communication beforehand is an absolute essential. So what we're doing is we're making the unknown a little more known. We're making the unstructured a little more structured. We're making the unpredictable a little more predictable. And what that's going to do is it's going to bring stress down. It's going to make the whole holiday flow a lot more smoothly, which is good for everyone.
It's so powerful because when you think about it, it's a simple thing to do, but you really need to be intentional about doing it to just bring the stress levels down before it becomes a problem. You're going to say something.
Just that point. It's just such a simple thing to do, but the impact it seems that it can have is huge.
Yeah.
If you can give the comfort of knowing, that I've got a known path ahead of me through this holiday versus I don't know what's going to happen to me. This thing, the wheels could come off very quickly.
Exactly. And I think it's also, it's not just the short term. It's not just this holiday. It's the long-term nature of the relationship, because otherwise I think what often happens is the more dominant person will do the planning and will decide what the decision making, will decide what we're doing. And the quieter one, whether that's the neurodivergent person or the non-neurodivergent person, will sit there quietly seething, and resentment builds. And then 10 years down the line, there's a whole lot of baggage and a whole lot of resentment. So I think it's, both just to have a good time for this particular holiday, but it's also very much about the long-term nature of this relationship and enabling it to thrive, especially in the context of differences.
Yeah. One of the things we love, which is why we work together so well, so much of what you do resonates with what we do around relationships in general. And what I love is you are using the lens of neurodiversity, helping us see the things we need to be intentional about in relationships in general. How do we manage expectations and give each other a voice, talking about the things that stress us out, whoever we are, bringing it to the table and creating more structure around it. So that's brilliant. So structure is one thing to think about in the holiday time. What else do you need to consider in order to embrace neurodivergence well over the holidays?
So I think that structure feeds into a lot of different areas. So I would say, for example, start right at the beginning, start with the journey, because that's something people don't necessarily take into account. So if you are driving, plan your route, plan your stops, plan your snacks, because these are the things that for some people really are very, very important, because if it's unpredictable, you stop at a service station, the food is unpredictable. Now you've got a problem. You've got a stress problem for one person in the family. If you're traveling by airplane, airports are incredibly stressful. So, building in margin, time margin, that's going to be essential. And I think, for one person in the family, that's probably important, and the others are going to be huffing and puffing. So there needs to be this shared understanding as to why we're at the airport 3 hours early and why it's necessary to keep some calm, for it actually means for everybody, but particularly for the neurodivergent person. Airports are a sensory nightmare. They are busy, they are bright, they are noisy. You get the smell of perfume, and then move to the food courts. And now again, we've got the issue of unfamiliar food. So I think, again, it's pre-thinking these things, and knowing what your options are, knowing how you're going to navigate them. Some people I know, even very able people, go as far as wearing the sunflower lanyard, which signals to airport staff, I am stressed. And this is important, especially if you're going through security and you go through the thing that tingles when you've got, I can't think of the name right now, but it beeps. Some people don't like to be touched. So it's a signal.
That, or also the vehicles going up and down can be beeping, or all sorts of things.
Absolutely. So I think, it is pre-thinking that. So I think travel is a big one. So starting right from the get-go, as far as, on the airplane, even planning your activity, what are you going to do there? I often say to people, let's craft a whole lot of what if statements. So what if we get stuck in traffic? What if I don't like the food? What if the earphones don't work on the airplane? Have these pre-planned, pre-thought ways to handle situations that crop up. So they may not be necessary, but if they do crop up, you have pre-thought at least some of them. So we are minimizing some of the unpredictability that might happen by thinking of likely case scenarios. So I think travel, definitely one. Another huge one is choice of destination. So again, family members might have massively different opinions as to what constitutes a good holiday. Someone might want to be in a resort because the food is made and you can just, rest and relax. And another person might find that very stressful because there's no control over the food. There's too many people around, again, sensory-wise, too much noise. So I think carefully about destination, talk it through, have the chance to discuss what your preferences are. And, a lot of people that I work with say that because familiarity is such a key thing, going to the same destination actually works. And why it works is because when you arrive, the first 24 hours, if you've been there before, aren't about reorientating yourself. That what it means is you can get there and you can rest and you can breathe. And again, that's good for everybody. But other family members are going to crave novelty, adventure, something new, something different. So how do you combine these two? And it's about the conversation. Maybe we choose the same destination, but we'll do different things, or, some of the family will do different things. I think that, again, there's no prescriptive answer here, but I think the conversations are important and everybody's voice counts. And it's really important to take that into consideration because, again, from a certainty perspective, a lot of it goes back to this. You get to a destination, the bedding is different. The space is different. The food is different. The pillows are different. Everything is different. And for somebody who is wired to crave certainty and structure and knowing, it can make you feel really uncomfortable. And if you're feeling really uncomfortable, then, that's probably going to end up in some sort of, unpleasantness but going on between family members, or stress within the person who's just desperately trying to cope, but it's not going to go ideally well. So I think that's really important as well.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, because I was going to play devil's advocate here and just say, actually, in our experience of relationships, most people are selfish. For me, life is all about managing my selfishness and actually recognizing I'm selfish and saying, actually, you know what, I need to stop being selfish if I want my relationships to succeed.
Yes.
But most people are selfish, and they will think, okay, you know what, I don't want to plan this holiday. I want to just, if you're of that mind, I just want to relax and have a nice, relaxing holiday. Why do we have to plan everything? I want to go where I want to go. Why do we have to go where, the same place every time? I want to be spontaneous. People are going to say these things. So I'm glad you started touching on that. But, how do you address that? How do you answer those people? I won't lead the witness here. What would you say to those people?
I think ultimately yes, I agree with you. We are all looking out for number one. But ultimately, by having goodwill towards each other, because that's really what we're talking about, isn't it? We're saying, let's have some goodwill here and not go, oh, for goodness sake, we have to always go to the same place. Goodwill is, okay, I accept that you have a whole set of different needs. Ultimately, it all comes back to number one anyway, because if your relationship is going well, if the children are happy, if you are enjoying the space, we're all benefiting. And I think when we play that short game where it's just me, what do I need? We actually end up shooting ourselves in the foot, because if the rest of the family aren't happy, or if one person is really not happy, well, I don't know about you, it's really hard to ignore that if somebody is falling apart. And I think that's another point I would say when it comes to communication and neurodivergence in the family, is that can be such an issue in and of itself. So knowing the telltale signs of anxiety and stress is a really good idea, because the neurodivergent person for themselves may not even recognize that this is happening, that stress is building, and may not have the capacity to express it in the moment. So I think if partners, if family members are on board, okay, when that one starts getting snappy, or, starts getting very controlling, or, starts fidgeting excessively, these are telltale signs. That means stress is rising. And what does that mean for us? Yeah, that means it's time to adapt. If stress is rising, it means that some sort of change is needed. That's the emotion signal saying, hello, we need to do something differently. So I think, again, just having those conversations beforehand when people are calm means that when you can see that going on, instead of going, oh, for goodness sake, pull yourself together, it's, okay, hang on, let's just read the situation. Clearly there is stress going on. Let's manage this, because you can change the outcome dramatically by guiding a person who's very stressed rather than reprimanding or, getting angry back. The outcome is going to look entirely different. So I think that's another part of the conversation beforehand as well.
That's really helpful. And before you move on, I almost interrupted you there. I didn't want to stop the flow. Can you help separate out how a child might behave when the stress levels are rising? Signs to look for in a child and signs to look for in an adult, because, as you say, it's so easy to reprimand them for bad behavior rather than reading with more emotional intelligence what's really going on. How we can interrupt that briefly. What happens next?
I suspect they're quite similar, but a little more subdued in the adult who has learned to moderate. And most neurodivergent people who are professionals and married, quite often the diagnosis came later on in life. So there's been a lifetime of masking going on. So they're really good at hiding what is actually going on underneath. Or you've had the benefit of your 20, 30, 40, 50 years. And so you have learned how to manage yourself out in open spaces and social places. And so I think quite often what you're seeing is the same thing. It's just a little more subdued. So in children, in the younger ones, what you're more likely to see is we either tend to externalize or internalize. So when you see behavior getting bad, crying, stamping, refusing to cooperate, bad is not a great definition here, because what it means is I'm struggling. So I'm not complying with you anymore, but that is because my internal stress level is so high I cannot comply. And the emotion has to go somewhere. This energy has to come out somewhere, and it comes out in behavior that we would we would deem to be inappropriate, but it's not that it's inappropriate behavior. This is someone who's not coping. And then the flip side of that is somebody who's shutting down, so withdrawing, becoming silent, eyes right down on the floor, body languages, shoulders are curling over, not answering questions, not engaging in conversation. It's another indication somebody is not coping. So I think those are, either one of those extremes are really stemming from the same source. And both are an indication I'm not coping. I probably need some helpful support and guidance here.
Yeah, rather than a rebuke.
Yeah.
It becomes such a challenge if you're in public, because then the parent or the partner would feel exposed in a way that they're not controlling the situation enough, and they might come out the wrong way. So just understanding what's going on really helps empower us to respond differently. In the past, just a quick question before I forget. I know in previous conversations we've had, Linda, you've mentioned that with masking, women tend to be a lot better at masking, so they'll mask even more if they have neurodivergence. Do you want to unpack that a little bit more?
So I think for women, the social, that communication ability is often very well preserved. And communication, I've had conversations with people who are incredibly articulate and able to hold a conversation and so on. So I think when that is the case, it's very easy to, you'll mask because you can. But masking because you can doesn't mean that internally you're not feeling this extremely high level of stress. So one of the hallmark features of females can be to become quiet and compliant, to toe the line, to appear as though everything is completely fine. And actually, everything is not completely fine. Internally, you're thinking, I'm not sure what's going on. I don't know why that person has said that to me. I don't know what the expectations are. I don't understand something that has just happened. And there's a huge amount of stress around that. Just think of yourself sitting and listening to a teacher and they say something and you don't understand them. Your brain starts going round and round that thing and you lose track of what is coming next. So I think this inner turmoil creates a huge amount of stress. And masking in and of itself takes a lot of effort. It takes a lot of effort to wear this cover whereby you are presenting as the smiley, I'm okay person, but actually inside you're trying to conceal this stress that's often building and building. So yes, females can be particularly susceptible to masking, but I think men as well. And I think it's also true to say with regards to masking, sometimes I have people telling me, I don't even know what's masking and what's me anymore. It's become so intertwined that it's almost impossible to distinguish. I've become so good at masking, I don't know when I'm doing it anymore. But it still does take a tremendous amount of effort. We know it's a risk factor for burnout. So, we know it doesn't do us any good at the emotional level. So yes, I think it's important to be aware that, because you can't see anything does not mean that there is no impact at an emotional level, and a very significant impact as well.
High cost.
Exactly. High cost. People are carrying that burden.
You were going to say something earlier. I hope I didn't cause you to lose your train of thought.
We can come back to
we'll come back to it.
We've moved on to the conversation of challenge. I mean, I'm really keen to hear, are there any examples you can share of, and of course, conscious that you're a therapist and, you may need to be very careful, no names, and you need to be very careful about what you can and can't share.
Sure.
But any examples of challenge that you've observed, been through, that you've seen out there that you could share, and also how people can how you've been able to help people get through those challenges.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So I think yes, absolutely. I think the unstructured social time is probably one of the most difficult aspects of holidays. And thinking of Christmas time, what do we do? It is unstructured social time. We sit around the table. Yes, we eat, but we talk, and we talk for hours. And lots of people I know find this very difficult because the nature of the conversation is also small talk for most of the time. It's not really intellectual conversation or deep conversation. There's noise, there's all sorts going on. So I think this unstructured social time is hard. And some of the ways to manage this that we've worked together to overcome this is to make the unstructured again more structured. So using an activity, putting the neurodivergent member of family in charge of games and letting them run, games. So there is something to do. There's an activity, because then conversation becomes about the activity. It's not just conversation for the sake of conversation. So that is a key thing.
It's not necessarily drinking games.
Well, those are, optional as well, or each to their own. So we won't ban any of those at Christmas time.
I only said a light introduction because we were in a function not so long ago. And it was great because they had all these games which normally would have been drinking games, but they had converted them so it was just clean fun. And it was great. It made for a really nice thing to be able to do. Because some people think, party games that has to involve it. Not necessarily.
No, I hope you've taken note of what they were. The games, so you can replicate them.
Lots of
over the season.
Lots of cups and lots of money, and some drinking games can be good, clean fun as well.
Yeah. Lots of ping pong balls and cups. I think good stuff.
Yeah. Well, I was somewhere a couple of weeks ago and we played poker with chips, I might add, not money, and it was really good fun. So yeah, I think games are key. I think another way to handle these unstructured social times is with jobs. So, the person who finds chit chat difficult can become the person who offers food, offers drinks, helps clear up, helps prepare food. That's the person who pops to the shop to get all the things that we've forgotten, who takes the dog for a walk, who takes the rubbish out. And I think, again, it's a way of giving that person something to do without just standing there feeling awkward. Obviously, the jobs have to be suited to the person. So, sometimes people go, sensory-wise, I'm not touching foods and dirty plates and things like that. But the point is there are a whole lot of things to be done. And if you've, again, pre-thought this and had the conversation and said, okay, this is what we're going to do, and please can you be the one who takes care of offering drinks and so on, what you've essentially done is you've given that person structure. And now they also have a script, what can I get you to drink? We have blah, blah, blah. And I think it all helps to keep things, in check. And the other thing I would add to this is something that I often talk to people about is having a graceful exit. So having a way to excuse yourself without disappearing. Because when you disappear, that's an unexpected behavior, and everybody kind of goes, what just happened here? Why is that person left? What's going on? But if you have a graceful way to do that, you can still excuse yourself, and it's a perfectly valid thing to do. If you're becoming overwhelmed, it's an absolutely valid thing to do. But you can do it by saying, this has been great. I'm feeling tired. I'm just going to take a quick, a little rest, or I'm just going to take the dog out for a walk now, or, it's been great chatting to you. I'm just going to pop to the kitchen and prepare food. So a way to exit the social situation before you get to the point of feeling absolutely done, because of the amount of effort that's gone into chatting and so on.
That's a brilliant suggestion, a graceful exit, because then you're in control of when you can, and you have your line prepared so you don't feel awkward doing it. That's wonderful. Gosh.
I just remembered my question, actually, and help me with the language, because I know I'm conscious that the language sometimes evolves in the space, and some terms will be in vogue and out of vogue and so on. But I'll use language that I actually shared by the person who shared with us. And they describe themselves as high-functioning autism, high-functioning autism. And it was a guy who was in an office situation, and he had particular skills in analyzing data. And he said, look, if you give me data, I consume data for breakfast like most people would, I don't know, have lunches. I'm trying to make an analogy here, but excellent at consuming data. And analyzing it and coming up with a solution much better, much better than the average person. And I think where a lot of us fall down sometimes is where, and this may be high functioning, again, correct me on the languages when in a moment, but I think there's some people that have particular giftings that may be on the spectrum, again, correct my language here, but they have particular giftings, and many of us can't see those giftings, and we assume that they can do everything that we can do. We don't realize that they can do things that we can't do.
Yeah.
And we don't give them slack in that space, and we kind of, when they can't do the things that we can do very well, we knock them down, forgetting about the things they do brilliantly that we can't do. So this guy was sharing how he had a fantastic relationship with his boss, and the boss had been able to, they've been working together for years now. The boss knows when this kind of analysis project comes up, give this person, they'll get it done in the time that 10 people would normally do it.
Yes.
So just focus on that and put the right team around them, and that works beautifully. So I think the point I was trying to make there was, I'll ask it as a question, what can we be doing to recognize the strengths in some of these people that we're otherwise missing, and criticizing them and cutting them down for the things that they can't do that we would expect them to do?
Yeah, I think that's such a good point, John. I think what often happens, what I notice a lot, is that strengths show up in the workplace, because once you leave school, you decide what you're interested in and you follow it. And most people will choose to do something that plays to their strengths. So oftentimes what you've got is someone who is absolutely brilliant at doing their job. And at work, the kind of conversations we're having at work are more intellectually based conversations. We're trading in ideas. So you can, obviously there can be communication issues at work, as you know, and this is your field, so you've seen this over and over again. But quite often what you get is a distinction between work and home, where actually work's going quite well. But at home, what happens is you step through the door and we're not trading in ideas anymore. We're not just doing an exchange of information. Actually, now what we want is emotional connection. And this is the place where a lot of autistic people will have difficulty, because this requires me to really tune into you. It requires a lot of emotional understanding. I need to ask questions about you specifically. I need to flex. Home is largely unstructured. Work is far more structured. So, we can sit and chat for a bit longer. We don't have to finish dinner at a certain time or get to bed at a certain time. So I think what often happens is that the strengths don't get a chance to shine at home. In the workplace, obviously doing, strengths finders type assessments, those sorts of things can massively play into building your confidence and enabling colleagues and so on to see where you shine and being given your jobs that suit you and not being asked to do the things that don't suit. I think what happens at home is that what is largely being used in home communication is a lot of very intuitive type of information. So none of us went to school and got taught how to use tone of voice, eye contact, facial expression, and body language. There was no lesson that did that. It comes intuitively to the neurotypical person. It doesn't necessarily come intuitively to the neurodivergent person. Some of it may, but a lot of it doesn't. And so I think what neurotypical people have a hard time understanding is that this is not easy for this family member. This is actually quite difficult. And because you may never have had to learn it yourself, you start thinking, well, why are you doing that? Or, I'm angry and you're not picking up on it. You're not adjusting. You're not asking me. And, so I think there is a huge, huge communication mismatch that goes on in the home environment. But what is really interesting is that there's been some research done where, researchers have watched autistic people communicating with each other, and the communication barrier disappears because now you're using the same communication style. So, I think there is this thing where people kind of do this criticizing of the neurodivergent family member who's not getting it, who's constantly, saying things that are coming across too rude, or telling Auntie Gertrude that, her haircut is awful or whatever, and really looking down on that, but not recognizing that we have simply got very, very different communication styles. So if a neurotypical person communicates with another neurotypical person, easy connection, but the same applies with neurodivergent people. So it's when we're crossing this neurological divide, if you like, that's when we're much more likely to come up against issues. And just to explain what I mean within the neurodivergent population, for example, much more direct language, much more say what you mean and mean what you say, and no offense taken, because it lands exactly as it needs to land. So I think, it's being mindful again of this neurodiversity paradigm. We are all different, and that's okay. And actually, it's really important for us to be able to respect each other's differences. This comes back to goodwill. So rather than this criticizing and your point where we're all inherently selfish, our way is the right way, goodwill and, to your brilliant work on the 4 habits, asking, not assuming, being careful, not crushing, these kinds of things, not just going with being critical, really taking the time to build some good foundational communication. Because oftentimes when I'm talking to a couple or a family, things just have not been said, and the other family members are going, oh my goodness, that is so simple, but had I just known that, I could have adjusted. I didn't know that was why you shut down and you stopped communicating. But if we have these conversations and we have them in a neutral way, not an emotionally charged way where everybody's upset, but we have them where we're just discussing what is going on, actually what we end up with is quite simple solutions sometimes. The solutions are not really that amazing and incredible. They really are quite common sense if you understand why what's happened has happened.
Wow. And you're right. It's this intentionality all over again, isn't it? To understand what's going on, to recognize when the signs when somebody's getting really stressed, and to know the very simple but very powerful steps you can take to bring the stress level down so that everybody can enjoy time together. And that leads us neatly on to the last question, which is what relationship, well, the last two questions really, what relationship advice have you received that, was really exceptional for you? And what advice would you want to pass on to the next generation? Even it doesn't have to be with the neurodivergent theme, but if it is, great.
Okay. Well, I'm going to put this one back. I'm going to link this one back to you, I think, because I think the reason I originally reached out to you was because I had seen your talk on the 4 habits, and I did honestly think communication and relationships are this complex domain. And I've worked with plenty of people who've been told to go away and finesse your communication, improve your communication, develop your communication. But honestly, what does that mean? And, let's bring some certainty and some structure into it. What are these things? And I just love the way that you encapsulated this huge area into 4 things. Ask, don't assume, be curious, not critical, be careful, not crushing, and connect before you correct. There is so much embedded in those 4 things. But, when you unpack each one, if you can take each of those habits and actually begin to use it, just something simple like ask, don't assume, be curious, not critical, get rid of that critical, replace it with the goodwill, ask the questions. The capacity to build super healthy relationships exists. And I think that that's the thing I always see when I see people struggling. I always think, and sometimes I see people and they start the session with, in fact, I saw someone quite recently and the session started with, we've decided to get divorced. And I always think, please don't. Just give it a chance. Just try for a little while to build some of these fundamental, foundational things, because the relationship doesn't have to end. Yes, it's difficult, and yes, there's a lot to unpack, but there are some really, really practical steps. It's not just about improved communication. There's some practical steps that you can take. So, kudos to you, and recommend your book to everybody, because I thought it was a fantastic way of just making something complex simple.
God bless you. We didn't know we were going to get such a shout out on our own podcast. Great having you as our guest, Linda. We'll invite you back.
Absolutely. And the point you make there about communication skills, so many people come to us and say, I'm struggling to communicate. But we say, okay, well, what does that mean? Actually, what do you mean by communicating? Yeah. Let's unpack that. And actually, when you break it down into component parts and give people things they can do in different areas, and actually recognize things that they're already doing, some of them are not working, and how you can stop doing some of those things and start doing things that will work better. People go, now I get it. Okay, and that's why we call them habits. If you can change your habits, you're doing things that are helping your relationship rather than damaging.
Yeah.
And the 4 habits, as you know, Linda, aren't accidental. They really address the 4 key areas of real challenge that we all face in relationships. And developing the habits are about equipping us to be intentional and to learn how to address those challenges head on. You've mentioned differences so many times. That's one of the biggies that we face straight away when we come up on our differences. How do we deal with that? Well, be curious, not critical, and a whole lot of skills and techniques to unpack. Learning to do conflict well is vital, because once you have more than one person in a room, 2 or more, conflict
Yeah.
at some point.
Yeah.
And that's, be careful not crushing in how you deal with that. So each of the habits addresses ask, don't assume is probably, we're talking about this recently, weren't we? It's probably the most difficult because that's addressing the assumptions, the beliefs, the values that we
stuff, things that we've been carrying for a while. We have no idea why we're carrying these things.
Well, they're inbuilt in us, aren't they?
We think they're part of us. This is me, and this is how it should be.
This is what right looks like.
Yeah, exactly.
And being able to even ask and recognize that your assumptions are placing expectations on the other person, but you really need to ask what's important to them and not assume it's the same thing as you. So that's the one that's probably the most difficult because you have to have some really courageous conversations around deep-seated values, but very foundational in building mutual trust and respect. And then connect before you correct. We're so good at telling people off, telling them where they need to improve, telling them what they've done wrong, telling them when their behavior is bad behavior, without really connecting with empathy and communicating value and love and appreciation on purpose, to really build the warmth and connection in relationships. So that's why we work together so well. So much resonance in what you're doing and what we're doing.
Yeah.
I think we could go on.
We could go on. But this is why I've certainly loved having this conversation is just recognizing that being neurodivergent is just a different kind of difference. We're all different, as you started out by saying, we're all different. I think neurotypical people can kind of get lazy and think, well, people who kind of think like me are very similar to me, and so therefore, we can work things out. And neurodivergent are different. They think very different. Well, we all think very differently.
Yes, true.
Let's just recognize that this is a particular way of thinking. Yeah. And whatever we can do to support and help them in that space will help them and ultimately help ourselves because we're relating to them in a nature and easier relationship. It speaks back to that selfish nature of ourselves.
Yes.
What's kind of working for me. I can help. If I help you, it helps me. Then why wouldn't I do that?
Yeah.
Well, this comes back to the word Linda used right at the beginning, is helping to access that untapped, to recognize and to access that untapped potential that neurodivergent people bring that we don't have, and absolutely will be better off for including them in our conversations, in our workplace, in our home.
Indeed.
Wow. Wonderful. We can keep talking. We can keep going, but I'm conscious that we should draw it to a close.
Yeah.
What could people do? People want to find out a bit more. Either they are neurodivergent themselves and are trying to manage that, especially during the holiday season, as we've tried to dedicate this episode, or indeed they have people around them who are neurodivergent. What else? Yes, you've given some fantastic tips, and thank you so much for that. But if people want to go deeper, how can they contact you? What are the next steps for people?
Welcome to contact me through my website, which is www.autismrootmap.com. autismrootmap.com.
We'll spell it in the show notes. Yeah. Wonderful.
Yeah, well, thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Such a pleasure spending this time with you. We'll encourage everybody to like it, subscribe, share it, get the word out, especially if you or somebody you know is neurodivergent in any way. Families, colleagues, whoever they are, let's share this podcast so that together we can help everybody de-stress and actually enjoy more of what we all hope for in the holiday season. Warmth, love, laughter, fun together. So thank you very much. See you on the next one.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
We hope you enjoyed that episode. And if you did, and you want to hear more, the best thing to do is subscribe. Then you'll never miss an episode. There's a new one every Friday. You can stay connected with us on social media at The 4 Habits for updates, behind-the-scenes content, and to participate in discussions related to the show. We always love to hear from you. And of course, if you've enjoyed this podcast, please leave us a review on your preferred platform to allow us to reach more listeners and help people around the globe radically transform the way they do relationships so they too can enjoy better harmony at home, thrive at work, and win at life.